Fellow comrades, and welcome to another video on the Russian Revolution area of Study 1. This will be our last video from area of Study 1. It is an overview of the entire area of study, causes of the Russian Revolution, and we'll be doing it through a timeline. So let's get straight into it. So let's start before our study actually begins, which is in 1861 with the emancipation of the serfs. Now, this ended a long period of peasant servitude in which peasants lived under a system of serfdom, where they were virtual slaves of landowners who worked the land for these bourgeoisie, the members of the bourgeoisie. This was a significant reform that took place, well before our study, that improved the lives of peasants in many ways, but taxes remained high and they still remained poverty-stricken. During the 1890s, Sergei Witt initiated a period of rapid industrialization known as the Great Spurt, which improved Russia's heavy industry, but didn't do much for workers and peasants within Russia. On the 14th of May, 1896, is the coronation of Tsar Nicholas II and Tsarina Alexandra. This is the beginning of our study. And on the same day as the coronation is the Kudinka field tragedy, leaving 1,300 dead and leading to, due to Nicholas's unsympathetic response to the tragedy, this led to Nicholas being dubbed Nicholas the Bloody. On the 8th of February 1904 marks the beginning of the Russo-Japanese War after the failed negotiations with Japan over Manchuria leads to the Japanese attack on Port Arthur in China, which is where Russia's Pacific Fleet was based. In December 1904, the dismissal of 4 workers from the Putilov Steelworks leads to widespread industrial unrest. This industrial unrest continues into 1905, particularly on the 9th of after the Bloody Sunday massacre on the 9th of January 1905. So Bloody Sunday is an incredibly significant event where between 200 and 800 people were killed and by Tsarist troops after a peaceful protest was led by Father Georgy Gapon, who wanted to present a petition to the Tsar with some of the workers' grievances. So after the Tsarist troops fired on the protesters, Nicholas was dubbed by many, it was popularly dubbed Bloody Nicholas, and this led to increasing industrial action. On the 8th of May, 1905, was the formation of the Union of Unions. This was a professional middle-class group that demanded liberal reforms such as increased civil rights and universal suffrage. On the 14th of June, 1905, was the mutiny on the battleship Potemkin. So this is after over a year of the Russo-Japanese War, and after Russia had already suffered 2 losses in the war, the Battle of Mukden and the Battle of Tsushima, which destroyed the entire Baltic fleet. So this is an example of soldier and sailor mutiny and the impact that that had on the Tsarist regime. On the 5th of September 1905, the Treaty of Portsmouth brings an end to the Russo-Japanese War, with Russia losing the war, losing Port Arthur, Manchuria, and the Korean Peninsula to Japan, and this was a national humiliation for Russia. On the 13th of October 1905 was the foundation of the St. Petersburg Soviet of Workers. The very next day, on the 14th of October, the Soviet called for a general strike of workers, and 1.5 million people went on strike, bringing Petrograd and most of Russia's cities to a standstill. And this put enormous pressure on the Tsar to implement the October Manifesto, which was on the 17th of October, 1905. This promised liberal reforms such as civil rights. It promised an elected Duma, and also promised that all state laws would have to pass through the Duma. So Nicholas was making some concessions, making some reforms. But oh wait, in April 1906, Sergei Witt resigns on the 22nd of April. A day later, the fundamental laws are passed. So this is Russia's first constitution. And many of the promises made in the October Manifesto are reversed. So for instance, the fact that all state laws would have to pass through the Duma was flipped to all laws had to pass through the Tsar. And on the 27th of April, 1906, the first Duma opens. This was a largely progressive Duma with majority Trudoviks, which was a breakaway group of the Socialist Revolutionaries, as well as 20% cadets, so progressive liberals. This Duma lasted 73 days. On the 8th of July, 1906, Pyotr Stolypin was appointed prime minister. He introduced a period of martial law and was so well known by the number of executions during his time as prime minister that the hangman's noose was referred to as Stolypin's necktie. He also introduced peasant agrarian land reforms in an attempt to make the peasants loyal to the Tsar. However, his land reforms couldn't really show success before he was assassinated in 1911. From February to June 1907 was the second Duma. This lasted 17 weeks and was even more progressive than the first. After being dissolved, Stolypin introduced electoral reforms to make it harder for progressive and revolutionary parties to be voted for. That was a bad sentence, sorry. In September 1911, Pyotr Stolypin is assassinated before his land reform shows any results. Then 6 months later, or 7 months later, on the 12th of April, 1912, the Lena Goldfields massacre draws comparisons to Bloody Sunday and leads to an increase in industrial action. This didn't have as big an effect as Bloody Sunday, largely because the Lena Goldfields massacre took place in Siberia, far away from the hustle and bustle of St. Petersburg or Moscow, whereas Bloody Sunday happened at the doorstep of the Winter Palace. On the 19th of July, 1914, Germany declares war on the Russian Empire. Initially, the war brings increased patriotism, but this does not last long. I should have noted, by the way, that these dates are old style. So the calendar changed in 1918 in Russia. So Russia had a different calendar to the rest of the world before 1918. So I should have noted that earlier, but we'll discuss it in class. In August 1915 was the formation of the Progressive Bloc. This was a liberal group of cadets and Octoberists whose intention was to avert revolution through implementing further reforms. The Tsar was not in favor of the Progressive Bloc and, in fact, dismissed any ministers who were supportive of it. On the 22nd of August 1915, the Tsar assumes command of the army, leaving the Tsarina in the capital to govern. This was arguably the Tsar's biggest mistake during World War I, as it left his wife, a German woman, in charge of the capital and in charge of the government. And it took him away from the capital and made him solely responsible, at least in the eyes of the people, for any military losses that Russia suffered during the war. On the 14th of November 1916, after a period of ministerial leapfrog during the reign of chaos that was Tsarina Alexandra and Grigory Rasputin, Pavel Milyakov, leader of the cadets, delivered a damning speech accusing the Tsarist regime of stupidity or treason. Oh, I left out an I in stupidity. That was a mistake. I do know how to spell stupidity. I'm not that stupid. Oh, that was bad. Sorry. The 16th of December, 1916. Rasputin is murdered by Tsarist loyalists after he was accused of sleeping with their wives. And look, those accusations were probably accurate. On the 23rd of February 1917, the beginning of the February Revolution. It is International Women's Day, and the march effectively marks the beginning of the February Revolution. The people of Petrograd are hungry. They are sick of the war. They want peace, bread, land. That's something that the Bolsheviks will really use to their advantage, those desires of the Russian workers. On the 27th of February 1917, the Provisional Committee assumes authority and the Petrograd Soviet is formed. So this is the beginnings of dual authority, but this is just before the Tsar abdicates. On the 2nd of March, 1917, is the Tsar's abdication. He passed on control to his brother Mikhail, but Mikhail gave up the throne and pledged allegiance to the provisional government just one day later. It should be noted that Soviet Order Number 1 was released on the 1st of March, 1917, and this essentially gave the Petrograd Soviet, control of the Petrograd garrison, but was widely interpreted as meaning that the Soviet had control of the army. So this really effectively starts the period of dual authority in which the provisional government has authority without power, while the Petrograd Soviet has power without authority. That's according to Alexander Kerensky. On the 3rd of April 1917, Lenin returns to Russia, and on the 4th of April, he presents his April theses that can be boiled down to a few key catchphrases. The first one being all power to the Soviets. The second one being peace, bread, land. The third one is let's turn this imperialist war, World War I, into a civil war, i.e. class warfare. On the 18th of April 1917, Pavel Milyakov, who had previously accused the Tsar of stupidity or treason, released a note committing, with Russia's declaration of war aims, committing Russia to the continued war effort. This caused public uproar because people wanted to get out of the war. They didn't want to continue through to victory. In June 1917 was the June Offensive. This led to 40,000 soldiers being killed, 230 kilometers of Russian land being lost to Germany, and 400,000 soldiers deserting the front. Those deserters would go back to Russia, back to their villages. Largely, they were mainly peasants, back to the cities, and they would take part in armed insurrections known as the July Days. So 3rd to 6th of July was the July Days, which Lenin described as something considerably more than a demonstration and less than a revolution. In August 1917, I really like the way that these three events are just 1 month after another. So June Offensive, July Days, August is the Kornilov Affair. So the Kornilov Affair is when General Kornilov, the newly appointed commander-in-chief, arguably attempts a coup d'etat. However, that's how Kerensky interpreted it. And so he released the Bolsheviks that had been imprisoned after the July days, because I should have mentioned the Bolsheviks were blamed for the July days. So Kerensky released all the imprisoned Bolsheviks, gave them guns, and they were let out to defend Petrograd. So the Kornilov affair leads to the formation of the Red Guards, who is an armed militant group loyal to the Bolsheviks. In September 1917, Trotsky becomes chairman of the Petrograd Soviet. It should be noted here that the Bolsheviks, after the Kornilov affair, rapidly grew in popularity, and they had majorities in pretty much every Soviet throughout Russia. On the 7th of October, so we're into October now, 7th of October 1917, Trotsky denounces the provisional government at the Constituent Assembly pre-parliament, and Lenin on the same day returns to Petrograd. 3 days later, the 10th of October 1917, is a secret meeting of the Bolshevik Central Committee to discuss staging an uprising against the provisional government. It is not there's no date is set, it's just a meeting of intent, a declaration of intent. On the 16th of October 1917, the Military Revolutionary Committee, or Milrevcom, is formed to take control of the city's garrison. Yeah, go back to the last video to find out more about that. From the 23rd to the 24th of October 1917, Milrevcom and Red Guards seize control of Petrograd after Kerensky takes action against the Soviet. For instance, closing Bolshevik newspapers, attempting to arrest Bolshevik leaders, attempting being the operative word there, and lifting the bridges between the working class districts of Petrograd and the rest of the city. So Trotsky said, no, you will not do that, and told the Milrevcom and Red Guards to take control of Petrograd and arrest the provisional government. Kerensky fled on the 25th of October. Speaking of the 25th of October, 25th to 26th of October 1917 is a Bolshevik-led insurrection which seizes power in the storming of the Winter Palace. Storming is in inverted commas here because it really wasn't the heroic sort of battle that lots of the Bolshevik propaganda would suggest. It was largely just walking in and taking the Winter Palace. There was no real fight, but that did lead to the end of the provisional government. And finally, on the 27th of October 1917 was the formation of Sovnarkom, the Council of People's Commissars. So this was announced on the 27th of October. A new Soviet Central Executive Committee was elected, and straight off the bat, Lenin does not mess around. 2 new decrees are issued on that very same day, which we'll talk about in our next video, but these are the decrees on press, the decrees on land, and the decree on peace. So 3 decrees. They actually released 116 decrees in their first couple of months in power. So that brings us to the end of Area of Study 1. And on to Area of Study 2 we go. Here is Lenin, 1917. Down here it says, with the hammer and sickle, the symbol of communism. So I hope you found this video interesting and useful. I will see you next time when we will begin studying Area of Study 2, the consequences of the Russian Revolution. See you next time.